Welcome to week 3 of the class. I've been very happy to read a lot of your postings, to read your assignments, and I've been very impressed with what I've seen so far and what you've turned in. So I hope you're understanding everything that I've presented to you, and I hope that you're finding some of it interesting. I know it can be a little overwhelming at times, but there's a lot of good material out there on early American history. So week 3, I just kind of wanted to give a general overview again. Uh, in the Foner book, we're on chapter 3, Creating Anglo-America. So we're going to start to see the development of what kind of feels like an English society in North America as families are being established and societies are being created, and there's just a sense of feeling like English. We'll finish up the Pocahontas book this week, chapter 6 through 9, and I have the questions posted here again that I posted for last week. So kind of follow along with those questions so that you're having those general takeaways from the book. You've probably sort of wondered, I'm reading this book, why am I not being asked more questions on it? The book is going to largely play a large role in the first writing assignment that we have, and I'm going to give you the assignment for that in next week's course so you can start to think about it. But I also want to talk about that today because it's going to be largely present in this week's readings. What I'm going to largely be looking for you to write about in this first writing assignment are the problems. What are the disagreements that people are having in the colonies? And we're going to see that in New England with people like Anne Hutchinson and Roger Williams and the Salem witch trials. But I also want you to consider this in the Pocahontas book. What are the disagreements that the colonists, the Virginian colonists, are having amongst themselves? Not necessarily with the Native Americans, but as the colonists have to deal with the Native Americans, they at points disagree about how to handle that. And so I'd kind of like you to be looking for that this week as you finish up that book. Where are the disagreements among the Virginians about how to deal with the Native Americans, how to treat the Native Americans? And I'll talk about that a little bit more next week so that you can kind of pull that out. But this week especially, be looking for the disagreements. What's causing people to disagree in these societies? You'll get to see a little bit of that in the 3 readings that I've selected for this week, and I actually want to talk about these readings, so I'm going to go into them a little bit more in a moment. I have 3 more lectures I'd like you to read from, actually listen to, from Professor Allison's lectures. The first one is on Roger Williams and Anne Hutchinson. This lecture includes a third section about a third person. I don't need you to listen to that one, so you can end it when he finishes talking about Anne Hutchinson. The second lecture is about Bacon's Rebellion, which takes place in Virginia in the 1670s by Nathaniel Bacon. It's a really interesting event, and so I like the way Professor Allison talks about it. It's also handled nicely in the Foner book, so that'll give you a good sense of that. And the last lecture is about the Salem witch trials of 1691, 1692. So I think you'll find that pretty fascinating as well, and some of your readings talk about that. This week, your discussion is about Salem witch trials. I'd like the first post of that by Thursday, the second post by Sunday. Again, I was really happy with week 2's discussion post. We got a little bit more participation, and it was nice to see the groups talking a little bit more. Just to sort of point out to you, I do have 3 questions. I only want you to answer one. So you pick the question that you feel like you can answer the best, and then you pick that one and describe that one. Your answer for the question you pick should be about 150 words. So I'm looking for a post by Thursday and a follow-up post by Sunday to that. The reflection questions are a little bit different now, and they're going to stay more this way that I have them now. The first 2 weeks, I just kind of wanted to introduce you to the class work and how I wanted to structure it. So now your reflection questions are going to look a little bit more like this. So just to sort of prepare you, they're not so much just 1 or 2 sentence questions anymore. Now they're questions that are going to ask you to sort of develop a thought more. And so you see, I've put in parenthesis about the word counts that I'm looking for here to kind of guide your thinking on this. So I have these 4 questions that really focus on the readings that you've done this week and the couple of the lectures by Professor Allison. So again, you'll just type in your answers here and upload that to the Vankel Hall site. And any questions on that, please email me. But I think these questions are pretty straightforward and what I'm looking for. So I do want to give you a little overview here of the readings because there's an extra reading in here, so I don't want you to read that unless you really want to. The first three readings in here are required readings for this week, so I do definitely want you to read this. This one gives us a little bit more background on Roger Williams and Anne Hutchinson, which I think are two really super interesting cases that come out of Puritan New England. The next two readings have to do with Virginia and slavery. I'm going to come back to these in just a minute because I want to talk about them in some more detail. This is a document that was written by Nathaniel Bacon. You can see it's called Bacon's Declaration in the Name of the People from 1676, excuse me. And this is Bacon basically explaining why he rebels against the governor of Virginia and the colonial society. So it's quite fascinating, and he spells out each specific reason why he's rebelling. I've edited this down a little bit because it's a little bit lengthier, but this will give you a nice background for when you listen to the lecture by Professor Allison about the extent of Bacon's rebellion. It kind of gives you a sense of why Bacon was angry and what Bacon planned to do about it. The last records have to do with Salem witchcraft. And so this is the court records from the initial questioning of the Indian slave Tituba. And so you can kind of see what Tituba is being accused of. But then what's really excellent about this is that this is Tituba's testimony. So you can see the questions that she was asked and her responses. So where you see the H, that's the judge asking Tituba questions, and then in T, V Tituba's responses. And so for your discussion post, I'm kind of hoping that you'll be able to pull from this document as to what Tituba says when she's questioned about whether or not she's a witch. The last part of the trial transcript are actual statements from residents of Salem that are essentially now providing affidavits accusing Tituba of being a witch. So those are something to also pay close attention to. And the last part of this trial transcript is the confession of Ann Putnam from 1706. And if we go back up a little bit here, you'll find Ann Putnam, where Ann Putnam had made a accusation against Tituba in 1692, and then in 1706 she recounts that. And this is a really nice read because you can kind of see the guilt that Ann Putnam feels for having falsely accused Tituba of witchcraft. So those are the three that I want you to read. If perchance you're super interested in Anne Hutchinson, I've also included her trial transcript. And so Allison talks about this, Professor Allison, in that Anne Hutchinson, when she's questioned by John Winthrop about her role in leading these meetings at her house and what these meetings were about, Anne Hutchinson really shows herself to be an astute mind, a theologian, someone who really understands her Christian belief, but at the same time seems to have a sharper mind for questions and the law and Christianity than any of the judges questioning her, especially Governor Winthrop. So if you're having interest in this, I would definitely recommend this as a reading. You really kind of see Anne Hutchinson get the leg up over John Winthrop. So it's a little bit long, but it's mostly just question back and forth. But if you have any interest in that, I definitely would recommend glancing through that. So as I mentioned, I wanted to talk about these in a little bit more detail. When I teach this course face to face, I have a little bit more opportunity to talk about the origins of slavery and what begins slavery in the American colonies. Slavery first comes to the American colonies in 1619 in Virginia. We saw that in last week's reading. And one of the things that I tell students that seems to maybe surprise them a little bit is that we don't believe slavery to have had a racist beginning. In that, what I mean by that is that it doesn't seem as though skin color is what precipitated the beginnings of African slavery. Specifically, it's our belief, most historians' belief, that when Europeans looked at the Africans, they did not look at them, they obviously looked at them differently because of their skin color. But one of the prime motivations for slavery among the Africans is that they weren't Christians. And so, since they weren't Christians, they were looked at as barbarians. And since they did not have that Christian religion, it gave Europeans a way to justify the enslavement of African Americans. Not African Americans, but Africans. And so that's what I'm talking about when I say that the beginnings of slavery weren't necessarily racist, in that black skin being equated with enslavement. But what comes to develop after the 1600s is the actual racial connection between slavery and skin color. And you start to see that in these two acts from Virginia in the 1660s. So if we look at this first act, Negro women's children to serve according to the condition of the mother. And so what's nice about this is that they're extremely upfront as to why they're doing this. They say there have been some doubts that have arisen. So people have had questions about whether or not a child who was fathered by an Englishman and a black woman would be a slave or free. So here we're obviously starting to get a sense that the white Englishmen in Virginia are having sexual relations with African slaves, and children are being born from these sexual relations. So, will these children be slaves, or will they be free men or free women? And so, the Virginia General Assembly is now saying that it is going to be based on the condition of the mother. So, if a white man has sexual relations with an African woman, the child of that sexual relations is going to be a slave. When the mother is a slave, the child will be a slave. And that's essentially what we're getting from this act here. And then another sort of interesting portion here: if any Christian shall commit fornication with a Negro man or woman, he or she, so if any, shall pay double the fine imposed by the former act. So you can kind of see Virginia is trying to maybe stomp out the sexual relationships happening between white men and black women. But as we'll see as this class continues, that has never stopped, and at times it becomes quite rampant, with slaveholders raping slaves and having their children serve as slaves under them. So that's kind of one instance now as when we're seeing race coming into this, that it is the race of the mother that determines whether or not the mother's child will be a slave. And now specifically, this act will show us how whether or not somebody was Christian or not pushed away from that idea of whether or not it was a racial system or a non-racial system. And now this one specifically, this act, is kind of showing us how the English are moving away from, okay, well, they're not Christians, to now saying, okay, it doesn't matter whether or not you're Christian. If your skin color is black, you will be a slave in colonial Virginia. So again, they start off with, there have been some doubts that children who are slaves by birth, if they are blessed by baptism. So in a couple instances, slave children are being baptized. So they're being brought into the Christian religion. So that has raised the question, can you enslave a fellow Christian? And that's the question that Virginians are grappling with. They have these slave children who have black skin, but they're being baptized, making them Christians. So do we now have to give them their freedom? And the General Assembly is answering thusly: conferring baptism does not alter the condition of the person as to his bondage or freedom. So essentially saying that slaves can be baptized, but they will not be freed upon baptism. And so now we're starting to see slavery become a racial system, whereas it began in which the English people were sort of saying, well, they're not Christians, so it's okay for us to enslave them. Now you're seeing them sort of change their stance on this, saying, okay, they can be Christians, but if their mother has black skin, they have black skin, obviously they're going to have to be enslaved. And so you're starting to see now that system where it wasn't racial fall apart into this system now in which slavery is extremely racist and completely predicated on racist ideas. I know I just threw a lot at you there, and so I hope that makes sense. but it's something that we're going to be developing throughout this class. So these two acts kind of give you that nice overview of how we start to see slavery become a more racist institution, in that skin color is determinant of one's status and not necessarily one's religion. So I look forward to seeing what you have this week, your postings, your discussions. Please let me know if you have any questions, and I will be seeing you online.